Welcome to the Story Copywriter podcast, the show that teaches you everything you need to know to write stories that sell and become the written voice of a business you love. With me, your host and founder of Story Copywriters, Rob Drummond. AI-driven copy tools have been around for quite a long time. I think it'd be fair to say that this is nothing new. And to me, marketing is simultaneously both a technical subject and a linguistic subject. And it feels to me like marketers with more of a technical bent, people who enjoy building funnels, people who enjoy building systems, the idea of having a tool where you can push a button and the copy just gets written for you automatically, almost instantly. That's the stuff of dreams, really, isn't it? So these tools have been around for a while, and I've been aware of them. I've been slightly dismissive of them. The other thing that I've noticed is that Google, so I've worked with Google ads for quite a long time. Google has been very keen on automating ad copy, writing new ads or proposing new ads. And it's been interesting that, in my opinion, a lot of these ads lack the quality. They never say anything that is new, effectively. They might say some things that you're not already saying in the ads, but they don't really come up with conceptually anything new. So I've always been a little bit dismissive. However, last year, a writer in my writers community said that he'd been using Jasper.ai, which is another AI-driven copy tool. But he wasn't just using it to write ads, he was using it to tell stories. And he posted a few stories in the community that he had written. And actually what he'd done was the tool had written it, and then he'd edited it into his voice and used it as a working first draft. And I thought, well, that's actually quite interesting, because just because I wouldn't personally use it, and maybe I'm a control freak about the outcome of my words, but just because I wouldn't use it doesn't mean that we need to be scared of the technology or that we shouldn't explore it. So last year, we took a bit of a look at Jasper.ai. I'm happy to maybe share that video for anyone listening to the podcast. And on the whole, we were quite impressed. We gave it some basic commands. It outputted some stories that we felt actually, if you were writing a Facebook ad or a short email, that potentially you could use it as a source of ideas, something to beat the blank screen. Maybe not for everyone, but for some writers, I could definitely see a use case. Fast forward to this year, all of a sudden ChatGPT seems to have burst onto the scene, and I'm sure it hasn't actually burst onto the scene. I'm sure that there's been a lot of work that's gone into this, and I've only just noticed it. But it was interesting to me that I hadn't heard of it, and all of a sudden, in about 4 or 5 different networks, everyone was talking about it all at the same time. I was like, well, if 4 or 5 different networks are not even just marketing people are talking about it, then perhaps we want to pay attention to it. So one of my copywriting mentors is James Daniel, who's on the call today. And I saw a post on LinkedIn that he had put up where he had been testing with ChatGPT, been putting it through its paces. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because James is a long-term direct response copywriter, a very sharp copy editor. So, if James is happy with it, then that's quite a high bar. So I thought I'd invite him onto the podcast to see what he's found. So James, welcome.
Hi, Rob. Good to be here.
So
I wouldn't say I'm happy with it. Let me just say
no.
I'm fascinated by it, terrified by it in equal measure, impressed by what it can do, but also very aware of its limitations. So yeah, I hope I can offer you some perspective on it here.
Perhaps we can just go back a few paces and explain what ChatGPT is for anyone listening who's heard of this but doesn't really understand what we're all about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my description of it would be it's I see it as kind of an aggregating tool. It's if you see it first and foremost as a researcher that is a vaguely competent writer, I think that's a sort of a useful starting point. So let's say, for example, you want to write a blog post for your business, whatever it is, and you can just say to it, write a blog post about such and so, let's say solar panels or something like that. And it will it will suggest various angles, and then you say, okay, right, angle number 3 I like, and it's interesting actually I say solar panels, because you used that in a video that you did recently, and that's the example I've been using all the time in discussing this. Just a perfect sort of generic business, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll give you an angle like how long will solar panels last, or something like that. What's the lifespan? And then you can say, okay, well, let's go with that angle. How would you map it out? And then we'll say, well, first of all, we'll talk about this, and then this, and then this, and say, okay, now write a draft of it. And then you can train it. So you say, okay, now rewrite the draft, but talk a little bit more about this particular thing, about the what could cause them to underperform, if you like, or what kind of maintenance they need. You talk more, you inflate a certain aspect of it, and then it will do that, and it will give you a finished draft of something, which on the surface looks very impressive, but there are limitations. First of all, we have to remember that because it's dipping into the web to see what's out there, then it's not just coming back sort of stealing other people's ideas. Inevitably it's going to be stealing entire phrases. So it's a pillaging tool, really, in many respects. And there are all sorts of bots and systems out there that are designed to sort of detect this activity. So if you're using that as a way of, for example, ranking high on Google, then you can forget it. But more important than that, I think, is that it doesn't necessarily serve human readers, because it lacks the style, the tone, the nuance of human language. And I think the example I gave in that post on LinkedIn is it sounds like it was written by Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, a sort of a person who is basically a droid in human form, who is devoid of all emotion.
I've just had the image of Sheldon where he's got his mechanized version of Sheldon, and he's got a TV for his head. And he's,
yes, I mean, he is R2D2, isn't he? Or C3PO, whichever one is the tall C3PO, I think. So I think, to me, it's incredibly useful as a research tool, because it can save you hours of scouring the web, as a way of sort of just pulling in all of the bits of information from different sources. It's also useful if you're like me, that you see the biggest challenge of writing is creating a first draft, where the structure of things, but it's getting that first thing on paper to kill the blank page. It'll give you a great first draft, but it will give you a lousy finished draft. You've got to apply. We as humans have a special language capacity that other species don't have, and that allows us to communicate in more than functional ways. We don't speak Klingon. We have a rich, particularly in English, we have a very rich language, and to use the output of AI, I think, is to ignore all of that, and it shrinks down communication, I think, into something that is purely functional, unless you rewrite it.
I think even in telling a story, sometimes we hit the limitations of language. When you're really trying to capture an emotional moment that's charged, there are limits, I think, even to language, and you being very careful about how you select your words. Even then, there are limitations for language, and you've got to get it exactly right.
Yeah.
So then, if you're expecting, a tool to do that, I'm skeptical.
It can't do it. I mean, one of my favorite web tools is Word Hippo, which is basically a big thesaurus. To me, that's the sort of the most intelligent thesaurus that I've ever found. It'll give you so many different sort of variations and neo variations on words, and it just shows you how many choices a machine has to make. And the chances, and most of them would be, if you inserted one of those synonyms directly into your copy, it would be, 9 times out of 10, it would be wrong, because it's near, but it's not exact, and the chances of a machine making the right selection from with all of that choice, when it has no capacity for understanding human emotion, where it doesn't understand the sort of the emotional and the onomatopoeic qualities of a word, and it doesn't understand the sort of the images that a particular word conjures up. The sort of, if you like, the sort of the meta quality of the word, the sort of what's
cultural
inside
interpretations to the same word even.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Shared reference points with your audience. It doesn't understand any of that.
It was interesting to me. So I follow John Loomer's work. So John is a Facebook ads coach, and he pretty much spent about 2 days trying to get it to write a video script for a Facebook ad. But he documented, I can link the article for anyone who's interested, but he documented how carefully he had to go through training the AI tool and re-asking it questions and telling it, no, that wasn't what I meant. Could you write something that focuses on this aspect instead? And it took him a long time. And I'm kind of thinking, if it's going to take you 2 days to get that right, unless you're then going to reuse that in perpetuity, are you not better just writing it yourself in the first instance?
I think in some ways that's very true. I mean, for somebody, if anyone doesn't have confidence in themselves as a writer, they might kind of know what they want, but they don't know how to write it. Then that could be a useful way of going about it. But personally, I would just give up and say, look, I'll do it myself. But I've read that post, and it's very interesting that he starts to get really cross with the AI.
He starts swearing at it. Well, I'm not sure if he actually swears, but he gets close to it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But I've also tried it for storytelling and script writing. Just sort of, I've been playing about with it to get a sense of its sort of potential. And I'm a bit of a sitcom nerd. So I first thing I did was, give me 10 ideas for sitcoms. And in fairness, it came back with some reasonable ideas. I mean, nothing I would ever sort of, write or even watch, but, considering it came from a machine, these were sort of okay ideas. And then I thought, okay, let's see what it can do for generating stories. So I thought, well, it's bound to know Friends. If it knows no other sitcom on earth, it definitely knows Friends. Okay. So I said, okay, give me 10 ideas for storylines for Friends. And again, they were sort of fairly staple kind of sitcom plots, around sort of something bad happens and they're trying to keep it from somebody, So the one that he came up with on the list was Monica is very proud of a vase, and one of the friends breaks the vase and they have to try and keep it from her. So I said, okay, it doesn't sound like a great plot, but I thought, let's see what it does. Break that into scenes. And then it did that, and then sort of, I said, okay, now write scene 1. And all's going well. I mean, the jokes in it were terrible. It's a really rubbish joke writer.
The jokes are very cliched, yeah.
Yeah. But then it when it put in the incident of the vase being broken, it got Monica to break the vase, and then it sort of, don't tell Monica. Hang on, do you not realize what you've done here? You can't, if you're keeping a secret from somebody, then they can't be the person that made it happen. And it has that really sort of basic error to it, and so while I was very impressed to an extent, considering it's a machine, really it's more like watching a performing dog balancing a biscuit on its nose, sort of, well, considering you're a dog, that's not bad,
Yeah, it feels like there's maybe a bit of like a shiny object thing, and maybe people are getting a bit carried away.
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah. I think a way to describe it, to use a different animal analogy, I think that really it's a very, very clever parrot. It can sort through information, but ultimately, like a parrot, it doesn't actually understand what it's regurgitating.
Interesting. I mean, I'm reading Robert McKee's book Story at the moment, which was he wrote it about writing for the screen, but actually it's mostly about story, story in general, more than particularly about screenwriting. And he's got a section in it where he explains that to be an author implies authority, which means that you know your world inside and out, and that the reader is taken on a journey because they're like, yes, I get this guy knows what he's doing with the story, or this girl. And if you don't have that, if you don't know your world, or if you aren't exactly sure about what you're trying to get across in the story, then you're always going to draw on cliches instead, because you fill in the gaps. Where there are no specifics, you draw on a cliche instead. And that surely is what the AI is doing.
It is, yes. And it's going to, I think this is it, that I see the biggest risk in this is that the more people draw on it, the more this is going to look in on itself, because the more content that will be out there that is already drawn from sort of, from the average of what is in the zeitgeist. So eventually what we're going to find is that everything just shrinks down to it's a derivative of the derivative. It's like photocopying something and then photocopying it again and doing that 100 times until the photocopy of 100 photocopies looks like a load of garbage. I think that could be where we're heading, to take a kind of an apocalyptic view of it. And I think the biggest threat to that, quite frankly, is sort of the cheapo kind of internet marketers who hire their writers on Fiverr, who are going to use this to generate first drafts and just put those first drafts out there rather than rewrite them. They are going to be responsible for putting all of that derivative content out there that is going to become the main source material for future work of the AI bots. And I think what we'll end up with is something like the high street, where everything is now completely generic and everything, all the independent stores that were interesting have disappeared. Interesting sort of original content will find itself on the sidelines.
We've seen this a little bit with Google ads, where the more that the ads become automated, the more they sound similar to each other.
Yeah.
And they might mention the keyword certain times or hit certain criteria like that, but then you end up with this like high street effect, I guess. So I guess the question that we've kind of talked how not to use it, like let's not view it as a magic push button solution and start just publishing what it's spitting out, even if you spend a bit of time guiding the AI. But so a sophisticated copywriter might use it to assist in research, might use it to start assembling possible first drafts, might use it to collate ideas. Another thing I was thinking about was if I was working with a client in, say, the States or maybe in Australia, perhaps I could use it to make the copy sound more Australian than I might sound.
I guess, although I think that when it comes to tone of voice, I think that's one of the key areas where the human touch is absolutely critical. Because a bot is just going to sort of put "good day" at the front of every line and
it's going to draw on home and away on neighbors, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. So I think that's actually a prime example of one of the shortcomings. I mean, I don't know. I haven't tested it for regionality, but it's kind of inevitable that it will do that. Yeah.
The only reason I said that was because you can't ask it to say, write this passage, but make it sound like Joey from Friends.
Yes.
Or give him his mannerisms.
It will do that to an extent.
That's tone, not content, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think that there's an interesting thing there actually when it comes to styling, which is, so I'm a member of a lot of different copywriting groups, and so I follow all of the sort of the fanboys, if you like. And there are a lot of fanboys of the sort of the most sort of legendary names in copywriting. Take for example Gary Halbert. And people who follow him, a lot of them use his teaching very, very well. But there are people who will apply his kind of in-your-face, kick you in the ass kind of style, where it's inappropriate. Yeah.
If you're in the UK and you sell to lawyers,
yeah, exactly.
It's not going to work.
Well, if you're selling to retired librarians in Tunbridge Wells, you
Yeah.
really don't talk in that sort of buy it or you're a dick kind of
Yeah. You
kind
don't
of a
send them
way.
the $5 letter where you staple £5 to the letter and say, here's the first £5. There's going to be much more coming your way when you take the offer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just can't do that. And I worry that if people allow AI to dictate to them too literally, there is always that risk that inappropriate style is going to happen. You could end up with kind of an Eliza Doolittle factor, from My Fair Lady or Pygmalion, whichever. There's that scene where she's at the races in Ascot, and by this time she's cracked the voice aspect. She can sound posh, but the language that she generates personally is still that of a sort of, it betrays her working class roots. So she's talking about an auntie of hers and saying, well, I reckon that they done her in. So it's still working class language. And I think you can get that kind of paradox of, the setting and the language are completely at odds. I think that there is a big risk of that if AI is taken too literally.
Yeah. So how will you be using it in your work, if at all? And if you were, say, mentoring a more junior copywriter, how would you suggest that they use it?
That's very interesting, because I'm coaching someone at the moment, and actually got them to sign up for the beta of ChatGPT last week. So in my own business, it's now my researcher. Yeah. I spend on a copywriting project, I spend probably about 50 or 60% of my time getting all my ducks in a row, making sure that I've got all the information that I need in one place. And then I'll structure it and say, I'm going to talk about this year and this year and this year.
Yeah.
And then I feel that I can dive into it and write it intuitively. So it will be doing all of my ducks in a row stuff for me. And it's not a case of, you just give it one instruction and then just print it off and say, there you go. Like you said, there's a lot of training it to sort of make sure that it properly understands the instruction. So I'll certainly be using it for that. Occasionally, I may use it to generate first drafts just so that I've got something to edit. But as you know from working with me, the difference between a first draft that I see and a finished draft, I'm a ruthless editor.
Yeah. Sometimes
so
it's more work as well. Sometimes
yeah.
you spend like half a day editing this thing. It's like,
yeah,
was it worth it?
Exactly. And very often, to say, when I say editor, I think that the best AI is still going to miss an awful lot of important information in the first draft. So, it's really about a structure and a couple of useful angles and things like that. But you'll be doing more than sort of tweaking a couple of words here and there in the editing process if you want to turn it into something good. I'm going to test that, and I'm going to see, does that work for me as a process, or am I better off actually just using it for nothing but research and then just writing as I've always written. That said, I'm not at a point yet where I would completely trust it to do the research, because we know, if you take Jasper, for example, I believe it crawls about 10% of the internet. And I think that's probably has more coverage than any of the others. So there is always that risk that important information is being missed out. And I think it would be very remiss to just say, oh yeah, it's found it, that's all I need to know. You've got to do some sanity checking, you've got to do some further digging. So I think, I'm really on the threshold of beginning to use this, and I'm going to draw my own conclusions as to just how useful it is. I believe that it's going to save me a lot of time and effort, but the bits where I really add value for my clients, that bit doesn't change in the slightest.
Yeah, because you're going to look at a piece of writing completely differently to how an AI tool might use it. Like you might look at it and ask, firstly, do you have the right big idea? And then is that big idea being portrayed at the right point in the copy? Is it coming across with the right emotion? Whereas a copy tool might not do that. It might edit it from a much more kind of line editor perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer the second part of your question, so the person that I'm coaching at the moment, yes, we were looking at copy for a sports massage therapy business, and we, as an exercise, just put it through there, and it came up with some very useful angles. not necessarily sort of the big idea that sort of acts as a delivery mechanism for the entire message, but just some useful sales angles. And actually that came through asking it to write some strap lines, and as strap lines they were terrible, but they did deliver useful angles that could be used as bullet points or that kind of thing. So I have urged this person that I'm working with to use it for exploration only, but for nothing more.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an ad writing application, especially because a lot of ads managers tend to be more technical rather than language people. They're not necessarily writers, and actually the ad writing is often their least favorite part of the project.
Yes,
like in a Google ad, you can enter up to 15 headlines, up to 4 descriptions. In a Facebook ad, you can enter up to 5 versions of the primary text. So if you're entering a few of those and then asking AI to come up with some variations of it, I think that's fine.
I think that works. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And that is a time save.
Yeah, I mean, I actually hate that bit of Google Ads, the way that it kind of now insists that you do it that way, because I'm a bit of a control freak, and I have an ad
Don't
that
get me
works.
Started.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
So, well, I think it's all part of Google taking control of the ad delivery and bidding the content. You as the advertiser are having less input on it, I think. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have an ad that works extremely well. I've got the 3 lines sort of that I want, and it's perfect. But Google doesn't show it as often because they want to show the stuff with the dynamic variability, and so it's I find that very, very frustrating. But I think that's an interesting thing about sort of some of the annoyances with AI. Detection tools are out there to sort of to help Google sort of identify and sideline things that have been generated by AI. And there's talk of it could limit your reach with email and with social media and so on. But it's interesting, of course, that the tools that are sort of standing in the way of AI copy are themselves AI. So it's a situation that's kind of regulating itself, and indeed there are content generation tools that have their own sort of plagiarism checkers built into it. It's a very weird situation, but I don't always trust these things. So if you take, for example, something fairly simplistic like an SEO checker, like that you'll get in sort of as a plugin for a website,
or something like that.
Yeah, or a readability checker, something. I don't trust them, because all they can do is say, have you used the keywords enough? And the readability things really just check for sort of transitional statements like well and so on, at the start of a paragraph. And I don't think that they are sophisticated enough to determine how conversational something is, and I don't think they necessarily understand the full context of SEO in terms of what's the competition for that keyword, what's the search volume, and therefore how important is it anyway. They don't understand all of these things. So I find that sort of AI, as well as being a sort of a tool for writers, it can also be an annoyance.
Yeah. For anyone wanting to look at ChatGPT, so I believe you just go to openai.com. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
There's no charge for it at the moment, is there?
There's not at the moment. I shudder to think what they're going to charge for it when it goes live. But
I mean, presumably that's coming, isn't it?
It must be. Yeah.
It must.
Yeah.
And like we've taken a look at Jasper, and I think the pricing was sort of, it depended on words. It was how many, there was a minimum price, but then it obviously escalated the more words that you use, where each word was a credit. But I think, for moderate use case, it was between sort of $50 and $100 a month, which for an agency maybe isn't a huge amount. If you were like writing ads or using it for quite a lot of fairly marketing critical things, maybe it's not a huge amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Jasper definitely has its uses. I mean, from what I've seen, it seems to me that ChatGPT is better at finding information, at finding it. I don't think it crawls as much as the web, as we've said, but it seems to be a better aggregator of content. But Jasper seems to have a better handle on style and structure and form, you know, and I do wonder if there's sort of additional value in sort of, you know, letting one run through the other, you know.
I think so. And I think in Jasper, you can say, I am writing a Facebook ad description, or I am writing Google Ads headlines, and it will tailor the output based on that knowledge. So I think, you know, let's not compare. It's not an apples to apples comparison.
No, it's definitely not. No. And Jasper is something I need to explore in a lot more detail. You know, I've been looking into it and seen a lot of demonstrations of what it can do, and I find it quite exciting. But it does, again, it does sort of have all of those limitations that we've discussed.
Yeah, I think something I'm going to do in my work is look at incorporating it more at the research phase, which I hadn't really considered. But as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, I've got at least one client where they're not always very chatty, or they're not available. It's hard to get updates out of them necessarily. Sometimes I have to supplement with my own research, and actually that would potentially be quite a good use case for it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that this is something, it's in so much in its infancy, and it's going to completely redefine how writers work. It's going to put a lot of writers out of work at the bargain basement end, and I think that, you know, the jobbing writers who continue, I think, will spend the next couple of years going through full sort of trial and error and getting a feel for how best it fits into their business. And I don't think that there is a definitive answer on it, because every writer has their own style and their own sort of their own preferred way of working, their own learning style. You know, I think everyone will have to find their level with this.
What we've seen in paid advertising is that because all of the platforms are becoming more automated, it's forced agencies and consultants to become more strategic and shift where they provide value. And I think maybe the same thing might happen with copywriters as well.
I'm not quite with you there.
Yeah. So for, say, a Google Ads agency, because we're not on a day-to-day basis, we're not adjusting bids. Sometimes the tool is creating new ad variations. We spend more time working with the client on the offer. A lot of the work has moved actually to the website of working on the landing pages. I was wondering, you know, for a copywriter who is just, say, being paid by the hour to write, you know, blog posts for SEO purposes about a specific topic, if that maybe, if they are at risk of having their work, their slice of work might disappear due to automation, or maybe they need to find other ways to provide value to the clients.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a very, I think, unpleasant sort of lower end of the industry where, you know, people will write like 1,000-word blog post for a $5, no pun intended. I don't like that, you know, first of all, because it encourages low quality, and it also, you know, teaches marketers not to pay for something of value. You know, and that industry is that side of the industry is going to continue in some measure, perhaps in an adapted form and on a different scale. But I think that the majority of people who make their living that way right now, by churning out really low value content to bait the search engines, I think that an awful lot of them will find themselves out of work. I agree. But I think the way it's going to change is that, you know, those who survive will be very heavily reliant on AI, and will find a way to do minimal modifications. You know, they'll look at, you know, spinning tools or something like that, and try and, again, it might be a case of putting one system through another. So ChatGPT generates this, and then they put it through a content spinner and hope that something original will come out. And maybe they're playing a numbers game that if they generate 10 articles, then, you know, 1 or 2 of them might be original enough to actually bait the search engines. I think there's going to be an awful lot of chancing it like this. It's definitely not something that I would recommend. But I think that there will be an awful lot of people just trying to play the system that way.
But I think beyond the SEO application, if you're, say, a business owner and you're looking to build trust with a particular audience, you're looking to, communicate your knowledge, in the process tell your story, then I guess what we're saying is that tools like this probably play potentially some role if you want to, but it's not going to be at the forefront of it
Yeah, I mean,
necessarily.
when it comes to telling your own personal story, I struggle to, and drawing on the personal insight that your experience has given you, I struggle to see how AI is going to have any role in that.
Yeah.
I think that you'd have to feed it so much of the detail in order for it to generate even a draft.
Yeah.
That you'd have basically written the content by the time it's been trained to do it.
Yeah.
So
that's
email, I
my
think
stance as well. So I'm kind of relieved that you said that.
Yeah, I think email and to an extent social media posting is going to be the sort of the main sort of aspect of that. It's where people, so let me tell you about this thing that happened to me, and this is the lesson I learned from it. I don't yet see a way that AI can help you with that.
Very good. Is there anything else that we should have talked about?
There's probably a million things that we should talk about, because I mean this is an enormous subject, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
And the ground is moving, isn't it? So if it feels like you're in the land of the blind, it's because everyone's in the land of the blind, and we're trying to speculate as to where the light switches.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think look, we both acknowledge we're both new to this. We're both story nerds and language nerds, both fascinated by the whole process. But we're only just getting to grips with this. But I think that we both see the potential of it. There's probably going to be many more follow-up conversations on this. But I think for anybody who's just finding their feet with it, it's definitely worth just diving in, seeing what it can do, get lost in the system, disappear down rabbit holes, and see what it can do for you, but never ever rely on it as your sort of as a replacement for a professional writer.
Great. So where can people connect with you, learn more about your work? Do you have an email list that people can subscribe to?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to jamesthecopywriter.co.uk, I've actually got a couple of free books on there that you can grab hold of on copywriting and preparing your marketing campaign, one on direct mail, lots of freebies there. Yes, you get some useful emails, or you can follow me on social media. You'll find me at just type in James Daniel Copywriter. You'll find me everywhere. I'm always having a rant about something or other,
Great. Well, I look forward to the next rant.
Fantastic. This has been very interesting, Rob. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining me, James.
Thanks.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Story Copywriter podcast, you'll want to make sure you're on my email list. When you sign up at storycopywriters.com/podcast, I'll also send you my 7-day storytelling crash course free by email. Please also make sure you've got a copy of my simple story selling book, which is available from Amazon in paperback and Kindle formats. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.